Billionaire came to town for a weekend. She thought it was the beginning of forever. He left without a word. But fate never forgets. 3 years later, he sees her again, with a child that carries his eyes, his smile, and a past he tried to bury. Now secrets will rise, hearts will collide, and love will be tested in a world that judges more than it understands. A story of betrayal, redemption, and the kind of love that refuses to die, even after being forgotten. The rain had been falling all day in the quiet town of Redvale, Colorado. Not a light drizzle, but a heavy, roaring downpour that drenched the roads and cloaked the mountains in mist. The wind howled through the narrow streets, and most shops had already closed early, their owners choosing warmth and family over braving the storm. But not Grace. The flickering neon sign of her father's old auto shop still glowed like a beacon in the storm. She was inside, sleeves rolled up, fingers stained with grease, humming softly to an old country song playing on the radio. The sharp smell of oil and rain mixed in the air like old memories. She could have gone home. But fixing cars wasn't just work to her. It was comfort. It reminded her of the father she lost last winter, the man who taught her how to hold a wrench and to hold her head high in a world that often looked down on women like her. Just as she was wiping her hands on a rag and thinking of calling it a night, headlights cut through the rain. A sleek, black vehicle, clearly out of place on these muddy roads, rolled up the driveway, hissing steam from under its hood. Grace stepped outside into the wet wind, squinting through the rain. The car stopped. The driver's door opened. Out stepped a man, tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her entire garage. His expression was tense, his jaw set tight, and his brows drawn as he looked at the smoking engine. He barely acknowledged her at first. "Car's overheating," he snapped. "It's brand new. I don't have time for this." Grace blinked at his tone, unbothered. "Then I guess time better make room for you," she replied coolly. "Pop the hood." The man looked at her, really looked, for the first time. Her ponytail was messy, her jeans were stained, and she had a wrench in one hand like it was a sword she was born to carry. But there was something in her eyes, steady, calm, and so very real. His irritation flickered into curiosity. "You're the mechanic?" he asked. "No," she said with a smirk. "I'm the town florist. What do you think?" Despite himself, a chuckle escaped his lips, and something shifted. He popped the hood, and Grace got to work, quick, sharp, and efficient. Her fingers danced over the engine like an artist's brush on canvas. She asked questions, he gave half answers. She rolled her eyes at his impatience. He was used to people tiptoeing around him, but she didn't bend. She didn't try to impress. It intrigued him. Inside the shop, Daniel waited, uncomfortable in the silence, watching her through the window. The storm outside beat against the walls, but the quiet inside the garage had its own rhythm. The smell of coffee brewing, the old dog sleeping in the corner, the radio humming low. It was a world completely different from his. He picked up a framed photo on the shelf. Grace, maybe 18, standing beside her father in front of the same garage. The smile on her face wasn't staged. It was pure, unfiltered joy. The door creaked open and she walked in, soaked slightly from the rain, wiping her hands. "You're good to go, just overheated from the hill and the weather." He reached into his coat, pulling out his wallet. She raised an eyebrow. "Cash won't fix everything, city boy." He paused, surprised by her bluntness again. "Daniel," he said, finally offering his name. "Grace," she replied. Their eyes locked. For a moment, the storm outside seemed to fade. "You don't know who I am, do you?" he asked, not arrogantly, but like someone who was used to being recognized. "Nope," she said. "You're just a guy with a broken car and an attitude." Daniel grinned, genuinely for the first time in days. He was supposed to leave, get back on the road to his luxury mountain resort, where wine and investors waited. But something about Grace felt like gravity, like the world he forgot existed. "Storm's getting worse," she said, glancing out the window. You're not going far tonight? He looked at his phone. No signal. Looked outside. No visibility. She tossed him a blanket from a nearby shelf. There's an old couch in the back. It's not the Ritz, but it won't collapse like your radiator. He caught it stunned. You're serious? Welcome to Red Vale, she said with a wink. We do things differently here. That night, as the storm raged on, Daniel Whitmore, millionaire, mogul, heartbreaker, found himself lying on an old couch in a dusty garage, listening to the sound of rain and the soft hum of Grace singing to herself in the next room. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone. The storm refused to ease. By the time the hands on the dusty wall clock neared midnight, it was clear that no car was going to safely leave town. Snow now blanketed the roads in thick silence, and Daniel's sleek black machine sat cooling outside like a useless toy in a forgotten dream. Inside the garage, the warmth of a small space heater hummed quietly, joined by the occasional pop of wind rattling the tin roof. Grace tossed another blanket toward Daniel with a grin. You seriously don't know how to build a fire? She teased. Daniel raised his hands. I build skyscrapers, not fireplaces. She laughed, a real laugh that filled the room like sunlight. You city boys really are helpless in the wild, huh? He sat on the edge of the old workbench, watching her as she poured 2 mugs of cocoa. It wasn't fancy wine or 5-star service, but the moment felt strangely perfect. No suits, no headlines, no staff calling him Mr. Whitmore. Just a man and a woman, 2 souls warming themselves against the cold night. As she handed him the mug, their fingers brushed. Something electric passed between them. He felt it, so did she, but neither said a word. Not yet. So, Grace began, sitting beside him, what does a big shot like you even do for fun? He smirked, sipping the hot drink. Honestly, nothing lately. Just work, deals, deadlines. It all blends together. You sound lonely. Her words struck deeper than she knew. He looked down into his cup, the steam fogging his vision more than the cocoa. Maybe I am, he admitted softly. It's strange. I have everything people think they want, but nights like this, they're rare. Peace is rare. Grace nodded, her voice gentle. You ever think maybe you're chasing the wrong kind of success? Daniel turned his head, eyes meeting hers. There was no judgment in her gaze, only curiosity, strength, and something tender. Something he didn't know he missed until now. She was unlike any woman he'd met. No filters, no fake charm. She was real, sharp, and beautiful in the kind of way you couldn't buy with money. As the clock ticked on, they talked. About her father, how he died in the same garage he built from nothing. About her dreams of restoring it, expanding it, maybe teaching young girls to be mechanics too. Daniel listened more than he spoke, a rare habit for him, because every word Grace said painted a picture of a life full of grit, heart, and hope. It was around 1 a.m. when she said, You hungry? He laughed. Starving. Upstairs, her small apartment above the garage was warm and simple. A kitchen the size of a closet, mismatched chairs, and family photos pinned to the fridge. She heated some leftover stew, and they ate at the kitchen counter, knees touching, laughter slowly rising over stories about their childhood. Somewhere between the second bowl of stew and the song playing faintly on the radio, their conversation quieted. Daniel looked at her, really looked, and said softly, I haven't felt this normal in years. Grace tilted her head. Is that a good thing? It's the best thing. Silence, tension, heat. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. Her eyes searched his, unsure, curious, drawn. Then he kissed her. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't wild. It was the kind of kiss that felt like 2 storms finally colliding, the ache of what they missed in life, meeting the hope of what they'd just found. Clothes dropped gently onto the floor. Whispers melted into the sound of wind outside. The passion between them wasn't about desire alone. It was about feeling seen for the first time. She traced the lines of his back like a story. He held her like someone afraid she'd vanish, and in that quiet Colorado night they gave themselves fully, fearlessly, to the moment. The next morning the sky had cleared. Snow glistened on every rooftop like fresh frosting. Grace woke alone in bed, the space beside her still warm. She walked downstairs, heart pounding. He was at the garage door, phone in hand, coat on. He turned at the sound of her footsteps. "I have to catch a flight. Meetings." She smiled faintly, trying to seem unaffected. "Of course." "I'll call you," he said, kissing her quickly, too quickly. Then he left, just like that. She stood in the open garage, wrapped in her robe, watching as his car disappeared into the glistening morning light. She waited that day, and the next. She checked her phone more than she cared to admit. The days turned into weeks, no calls, no messages, no Daniel. The man who made her heart burn like fire in the middle of a stormy night was gone, and in his place was only silence. A silence that would soon grow into something bigger, something she never expected. The days after Daniel left were heavy, like storm clouds that never quite cleared, even when the skies outside turned blue again. Grace tried to keep her mind busy. She scrubbed the workbenches, organized tools, fixed engines, took long walks, anything to distract herself from checking her phone. Again, and again, and again. But the silence was loud, and the truth settled in her chest like a stone. He wasn't coming back. Weeks passed. Then came the moment that changed everything. She stood in her small bathroom one morning, a cheap drugstore test shaking in her hands. The pink lines appeared slowly and clearly. Pregnant. Her knees buckled and she slid to the floor, tears falling freely, not from regret, but from fear, confusion, and the aching loneliness of knowing she would walk this road alone. Her father had only been gone for a few months. The garage still smelled like his aftershave. Some nights she could swear she heard him humming an old Johnny Cash tune while fixing up a carburetor. Now, the only sound was the hum of her tired refrigerator and her own racing heartbeat. She didn't scream. She didn't panic. She just sat there on the cold tile and whispered, "It's you and me now, little one." Grace never once tried to call Daniel, not out of pride, but out of clarity. He had promised to call. He didn't. He had kissed her like she meant something, then vanished like she didn't. She wasn't going to chase someone who walked away from what could have been real. Her pregnancy wasn't easy. Her body ached in places she didn't know could ache. Morning sickness turned into afternoon exhaustion. Her back hurt, her feet swelled. And still, she worked every day in the garage, taking in odd jobs and customers who often asked, "You're doing this all alone?" She'd nod with a brave smile. But at night, in the privacy of her tiny apartment, she'd hold her belly and cry. Not because she was weak, but because she was strong. And strength is heavy to carry, especially when no one offers to lift it with you. The day Eli was born, the sky outside the hospital room looked like it had been painted with gold and fire. A Colorado sunset like no other, as if the universe was saying, "Here is something pure." When she first held him, Grace was silent. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she stared into the face of this tiny boy. Pink cheeks, perfect lips, and her breath caught. Those eyes, blue as winter sky, piercing, familiar. And when he yawned, that little dimple flashed on his right cheek. Daniel. For a moment, she hated herself for thinking of him, for letting her heart still flutter at the memory of that snowy night in the garage. But she quickly looked back down at Eli, brushing her thumb across his tiny brow. "You're mine," she whispered. "And that's more than enough." The years passed, slowly but beautifully. Grace didn't just survive, she thrived. She turned the garage into something more. A community hub where neighbors came not just to fix their cars, but to share stories, laughter, and sometimes tears. She painted a mural on the side of the building with Eli's handprint at the center, a symbol of new beginnings. Eli grew fast, too fast. He had her fire, asking questions, exploring, building towers out of old bolts and wires. But he also had Daniel's quiet charm, his calm gaze, that confident little tilt of the head when he was curious. She never lied to Eli about his father, but she didn't tell the full story either. When he asked, "Where's Daddy?" she'd kneel down, stroke his hair, and say gently, "He was someone I once knew. You came from something brief, but you are something beautiful." There were hard days, bills that didn't add up, nights she stayed awake, watching Eli breathe, moments she felt invisible in a town where people whispered about the girl who got left. But those hard days didn't win. Grace's love was a force. She poured it into every scraped knee, every bedtime story, every peanut butter sandwich she packed for school. And in return, Eli gave her joy, pure, boundless joy. He'd run into the garage after school, arms open wide, shouting, "Mommy, look what I made." She'd drop the wrench, scoop him up, and laugh as if her heart wasn't still carrying a scar that never quite faded. Because Grace had learned the most important truth. You don't need a perfect love story to create a perfect kind of love. The sun was high above downtown Denver, painting the sky in soft blues and cloudless promise. A large crowd gathered outside a gleaming new high-rise, all glass and silver steel, standing like a monument to wealth and ambition. Balloons danced. A red ribbon fluttered in the breeze. It was Daniel Whitmore's latest victory, another luxury building added to his empire. Cameras flashed. News anchors rehearsed their lines. Investors and socialites stood in designer suits, sipping sparkling water and pretending to care. Daniel adjusted his cufflinks, smiled on cue, and shook hands like a pro. But beneath the smooth exterior, he felt tired, empty. The applause, the speeches, the wealth, they filled his days, but not his soul. Something had been missing for years now. And though he never admitted it, he often thought about her. The girl in the garage, the snowstorm, the night he'd never truly left behind. He didn't even know her last name. He never called, and it haunted him more than he let on. Just a few blocks away, Grace was walking home with Eli, now 3 years old and bursting with curiosity. His toy car had fallen from his pocket, and he darted into the plaza to retrieve it. "Eli, wait!" Grace called out, following with a laugh. She bent down to pick it up just as the ribbon-cutting ceremony began behind them. The sharp snip of scissors, cheers, more camera flashes, and then a pause, a single gasp from a woman in the crowd, and then silence. Because Daniel Whitmore had turned, drawn not by noise but by something pulling at his chest like gravity itself. His eyes scanned the edges of the crowd, and then he saw her. Grace. She stood just beyond the barriers, holding the hand of a small boy in denim overalls and messy blonde curls. Her hair was longer, her eyes more tired but still fierce, still radiant. She hadn't changed. And the child at her side? He stopped breathing. The boy looked like a photograph from Daniel's childhood. Same sharp chin, same icy blue eyes, same dimple in the right cheek. For a split second, the world around him blurred. No cameras. No reporters. No speeches. Just her and him and the undeniable truth standing between them. Grace looked up and saw him. For a heartbeat, she froze. The past, once buried, surged forward like a wave crashing against rock. Daniel, the man who disappeared. The man who made her believe in something and then vanished like it meant nothing. Her fingers tightened around Eli's. She wanted to turn, to run, but she didn't. Because she wasn't the same woman anymore. She stood taller now, stronger. And Eli was watching. Daniel stepped off the stage mid-applause, ignoring the puzzled murmurs behind him. He walked straight toward her, every step heavier than the last. He stopped just feet away. "Grace," he breathed, voice cracking with disbelief. She didn't speak. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger but in guarded calm. He looked down at the boy beside her. "Is he—" His voice dropped to a whisper. "Is he mine?" Grace didn't flinch. She looked at Eli, then back at Daniel. "He's not a secret," she said quietly. "He's a child. A beautiful, brilliant boy who deserved more than silence." Daniel's throat tightened. He looked at the boy again, now playing quietly with the toy car on the sidewalk. "I didn't know," he said. "I swear to you, Grace, I didn't—" "You didn't ask," she said sharply, cutting him off. "You said you'd call. You didn't. You left, Daniel. That was your choice." He had no defense, only regret. He crouched slowly to Eli's level, careful not to startle him. "Hi there." he said gently. I'm Daniel. Eli looked up with wide blue eyes, then looked at Grace. She nodded slowly. This is Daniel, she said softly, her voice trembling. The boy smiled. Hi, I'm Eli. Want to see my car? Daniel blinked fast, his chest tightening with a feeling he hadn't known in years. Not excitement, not fear, but something holy. Connection. He nodded, his voice choked. I'd love to. Behind them, the crowd grew restless, the cameras still snapping. A reporter recognized what was happening and whispered to a cameraman, Get that. This is news. But Daniel didn't care. Not about the headlines, not about the whispers, not about the luxury tower gleaming behind him. His past had found him, and it had eyes just like his. Grace stood silent for a moment, watching the two of them. She had spent years building a world for her son, a world that didn't include the man who had hurt her. And yet here he was, broken, shocked, real. It didn't undo the pain, but it stirred something inside her, something like hope, something like closure, or the beginning of it. Grace didn't want to hear her name on his lips. Not after all these years, not after the silence, not after he vanished from her life like a summer storm, loud, sudden, and gone without a trace. Grace! His voice rang out behind her, sharp and breathless, chasing her down the sidewalk like a shadow, desperate not to lose the light. She didn't turn. She tightened her grip on Eli's small hand and kept walking, but he was faster, persistent, like he always was. Wait, please, Daniel called again. Just give me a minute, please. She stopped, only because Eli looked up and said, Mommy, why is that man following us? Her chest clenched. She slowly turned around. Daniel stood there, not the polished businessman from the stage, but a man undone. His hair tousled from the wind, his tie loosened, his face pale like he'd seen a ghost. He took a hesitant step forward. Is he mine? His voice cracked like dry wood. Trace didn't blink, didn't flinch, didn't cry. She met his eyes, those same eyes that now lived in the face of their child. And in a voice low, steady, and full of quiet fury, she answered, You left. You made your choice. I made mine. The air stilled. Daniel swallowed hard, his pride falling away piece by piece. I didn't know, Grace. I didn't mean to. She raised her hand. Don't say you didn't mean to disappear. You said you'd call. I waited. I gave you days, then weeks. And when the sickness started, I still held on to hope. I thought maybe, just maybe, you cared. Her voice trembled now, but she didn't break. Not in front of him. Not in front of Eli. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, helpless. I was scared. I told myself it was just a weekend. I buried it, but I never forgot you. She laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. You had the luxury to forget. I didn't. They walked in silence to a nearby park, just a few blocks away. Eli skipped ahead, chasing a squirrel through the grass, giggling. They sat on a weathered bench beneath an old maple tree, golden leaves spinning down around them like silent witnesses. Grace folded her hands in her lap, staring straight ahead. Daniel sat beside her, his heart pounding like a drum in a deep cavern. Then she spoke, and every word was a blade, soft but cutting. I found out I was pregnant 4 weeks after you left. Daniel said nothing. I was alone. My father had died just months before. I had no one, Daniel, no family, no money, no support. And you vanished. Her voice cracked. I worked until I was 7 months pregnant, fixing engines with a swollen belly and aching feet. I gave birth in a tiny hospital room with no one holding my hand. No flowers, no calls, just me and the sound of my baby crying. Daniel stared at his hands, suddenly ashamed of every suit, every dollar, every deal that had distracted him from what truly mattered. I wanted to hate you, she whispered. God, I tried, but when Eli opened his eyes for the first time and I saw your eyes staring back at me, I couldn't. Daniel's eyes welled with tears, but he stayed silent. For once, money couldn't fix what he broke. I never chased you, she continued. I didn't ask for child support. I didn't send angry letters. I didn't post stories. I kept my head down and gave him the love you never did." Her voice softened now, not forgiving but exhausted. "I built a world around him. One where he'd never have to feel unwanted. One where I never spoke badly of you. I told him stories about bravery and kindness, and left your name out entirely." She finally turned to him. Her eyes were shimmering, not with tears but with the weight of years lived alone. "Do you know what it's like when your son asks why he doesn't have a daddy like other kids?" Daniel opened his mouth but no words came. Grace shook her head, pressing her lips together. "I used to imagine what you'd say if you ever saw him, if you'd deny him, pretend you didn't know. But then I saw your face back there, and I knew." Daniel looked at her now, his voice barely audible. "What happens now?" Grace looked away, watching Eli spin in circles, arms out like airplane wings. "I don't know," she whispered. "You can't just show up and erase what's been done. He's not some business project you can fix with an apology." Daniel's chest ached with truth. "I want to know him," he said. "I want to try, if you'll let me." Grace stood slowly. Her voice was firm but calm. "Don't make promises you won't keep, Daniel. He doesn't need another disappointment." She walked toward Eli, who came running into her arms with a squeal. She lifted him effortlessly, pressing a kiss to his hair. Daniel stood there, watching the two people he never knew he needed walk away. And in that moment, with wind brushing his face and regret flooding his chest, he realized this wasn't a story about missed calls or forgotten nights. It was a story about what happens when you lose something you never deserved to forget. Daniel stayed in town longer than he planned. Not for business, for Eli. At first, Grace didn't trust him, but slowly, Daniel changed. He spent time with Eli, read to him, helped him build toy engines. He even started donating to single mothers in rural areas. His heart, once cold with pride, began to soften. One day at the town's community fair, Grace and Daniel stood side by side watching Eli play. A family approached, surprised to see Daniel Whitmore, the millionaire, in their little town with a child from a working-class woman. There were whispers. Daniel heard them and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "This is my son. And that woman right there, she's the strongest, most honest person I've ever met." It was a moment that shook many. A wealthy white man, openly honoring the woman he once ignored. People began to reflect, not just on love, but on class, pride, and how society often judges too quickly based on status or background. Daniel eventually moved part of his business to Colorado. He and Grace didn't rush anything, but over time, they built something real, not out of guilt or fear, but love and respect. Eli grew up in a world where love beat pride, where a broken beginning became a strong foundation. And for the town, and beyond, their story became a quiet message. People are more than what they look like. Love is more than money. And every heart, no matter where it's from, deserves a second chance.